Okay, hopefully everyone can see our slides there. So obviously today we're talking about restorative practices and how we can support pupils to develop positive behaviours when things don't go to plan. So for some of you, this will be a refresher. For some of you, this might be new. But restorative practices are a ways of resolving behaviour issues and building positive relationships in schools. And they've long been used in the prison service and in the community to reduce offending and repair harm. But they've had increasing significance in our school as we become ACE aware and more trauma informed. Understanding of the particular barriers to learning that are faced by each individual pupil is essential in helping to remove these barriers and ensure our pupils attend, achieve and attain. So restorative practices supports our pupils by building strong relationships and developing resilience when faced with challenge. And it also enables us as staff to tailor our approach to dealing with distress behaviour so that we can manage it in a way that suits the individual and puts the child at the centre of what we're doing.
Okay, so as Emma said, we know that this is a refresher for a lot of our staff, but it's actually been really good for me as well to refresh this in my head and think about things that I do in my current practice that actually I need to think more carefully about. And that's my learned behaviour, how I react to young people. And what we're dealing with here is the learned behaviour of our young people. So young people can get these patterns of behaviour and act out of habit to get the response that they want to. Quite often when we're dealing with these pupils, it's low-level disruption, and it's something that will have been seen throughout their school career from primary. So when they're given a warning or a telling off in class, they see that as their cue. I've been here before, this is what I'm going to do. So they go into their learned response, they go into their routine and they escalate it because they're already in trouble in their heads. So they can kick off or whatever they learned to do in this situation, and then they gain their reward. And you'll notice that reward is in inverted commas there, because that reward might not be a positive thing. That might be kudos from their mates. We've seen that with young people that I'm working with at the moment. A reaction from the teacher, removal from the class, or even a punishment. That's their reward. So what we're trying to do with restorative practices is take that habit and replace it with positive strategies that our young people can use when things don't go to plan. That positive mindset and a way to take them out when they, which we all do.
So what are restorative practices? Well, as you can see from here, it's a method of resolving conflict and repairing harm and restoring relationships. And that's kind of the most important part of it. It's restoring those relationships. Young people are going to make mistakes. They're going to get into situations where they don't act in the best way possible because, you know, who in their teen years does make the best choices at the right moment. So we have to understand, you know, we're the adult in the room. We're in a position where we can de-escalate situations and reduce stress. The previous slide showed pupils, particularly those with ACEs, may exhibit toxic stress in those moments where they're challenged. Their bodies tell them kind of how to react and how to behave. So are they really in control of what they're doing? As Julie mentioned, it's that learned behaviour, it's that response to a cue that they have this pattern of behaviour that they go through. So what can we do to help pupils and engage them and enable them to develop the skills that they need to deal with these situations independently? And for me, that's one of the real benefits of restorative practices, is it kind of puts it back onto the young person to say, look, we know things have gone wrong, but we're not here to fix it for you, but we're here to support you and work out how we can make this better and how we can make sure that this doesn't happen again moving forward. So, you know, as an adult, we're in the fortunate position that we are able to adapt our behaviour and we're able to regulate the way that we react to things, usually perhaps not P7 on a Tuesday when you've just had S2, but we need to be that person who, you know, can take a moment, and because we have that positive relationship with young people, we can be that support, and that allows us to support these young people when they're dealing with trauma and teaching them to make the right choices when things have gone wrong.
Okay, so restorative practices fits into our school-wide behaviour policy and really fits in well with between pupils. Classroom teachers will be using it for low-level disruption, but restorative practices is also used throughout the school. So our pastoral heads use it to deal with peer issues through restorative meetings between the parties. Higher tariff pupils or bigger issues within the school. As a senior management team, we're using restorative conferences involving the person harmed, the person who caused the harm, and the supports on both sides to try and resolve the issue and help our young people find that next step forward and to resolve the harm that's been done. I guess as classroom teachers, we've got staff from across our school, you're not likely to be using restorative practices in that kind of environment, but where this really counts is in the classroom and by our classroom teachers, because if you can create that first step and help our young people to get into this habit, we don't see the other problems. So it's a really, really important thing for our classroom teachers. So it's one of the first steps that you should take in addressing a situation after you've given that verbal warning. It doesn't mean that you should stop using the sanctions that might go in place from your faculty or from the school. It works alongside that, and pupils need to be aware of that. And please make sure that you record restorative conversations on OTB, because we're always trying to build that big picture about a young person's educational experience, and this is a part of it. We might be telling a parent that that young person has been doing great because there's no referrals, but if we can see that there are a lot of restorative conversations happening, we know that that low-level disruption is happening, so we can address that with the young person. We Jamboarding, Emma?
Yes, we are. I'm just about to drop that into the chat. Seconds.
So, Emma's going to put a link into the chat for you to go into a Jamboard for us. And what we're looking for you to tell us is, when things go wrong for you, of course, and Bray, nothing ever goes wrong, but when things go wrong for you, what kind of person do you want to speak to? Who is that person? How do they help you? What are the things that they do that help you? What kind of person would you not want to speak to? And then what kind of active listening skills would you want to see? So Emma has dropped that in there, so we'll give you a couple of minutes just to go away and do that, and then we'll bring you back. Okay, so I have to say it's really satisfying when you put a task in like that, and a bit of a relief to see all of the really good comments that people are putting in there. So some of the things that people have put in: what kind of person would you like to speak to when things go wrong? Someone who's fair, respectful, kind, someone who's listening, willing to listen, who's forgiving, calm and reassuring, patient and understanding, someone who has unconditional positive regard for me. It all goes back to that respect agenda that we value so strongly in Braes High School. Someone who takes the time to listen and hear your side of the story. All brilliant answers. What kind of person would you not like to speak to when things go wrong? Someone who isn't listening, someone who shouts, someone who is judgmental or will hold grudges, who doesn't let me talk, is disrespectful, aggressive, So if these are the kind of people that we want to speak to, because that's the kind of person I would want to speak to too, if they're the kind of people we want to speak to when we make mistakes, then we have to be those people for our young people in Braes High School. We have to be that person. We have to model that behaviour for our young people when they make mistakes, because that lets them move on. Thank you so much for doing that task for us.
Yeah, we were going to do a Mentimeter, but we thought you might do like something different for a change. So as we kind of keep coming back to, it's about that relationship in the classroom with that young person. And we know that pupils need to be in our classroom to achieve, so it's vital that we really do all that we can to help students stay in class. So when we see distressed behaviour in class regularly, you know, we need to get to the root of that behaviour to deal with it effectively. And that's one of the reasons kind of we're so keen at that restorative practices. When you have a conversation, it gets recorded in OTB so we can see that pattern, so we can work out what is actually going on for that young person. So restorative practices, they are central to effective behaviour management, and they support our pupils to cope with difficult situations by helping them learn how to manage their emotions. The restorative approach kind of provides us with the tools to help pupils articulate the problem when things go wrong, and it allows them to feel heard, understood, but it also puts the onus on them to try and fix things with our support. So when we were doing that Jamboard thing, the thing that kept coming up there was somebody who's going to listen, somebody who's forgiving, somebody who, you know, has that unconditional positivity, that person who is not going to give up on them. But I think the key part there is the listening. A big part of distressed behaviour when kids are challenged is that they don't feel they're getting to tell their side of the story. They don't feel they're getting listened to. And restorative practices, obviously, that is the heart of what we do. But the first question we ask is, what happened? So we're giving them a chance to put across their side of the story, to tell us what happened, and to show them that we are prepared to listen to that and talk about it. And I think that is a big thing for our young people, to be able to say, this is what I feel happened, and then us to talk through that with them. And we know that pupils respond better when we approach them in a calm, nurturing manner. And I think the other side is that we don't really think about is a lot of our kids who are exposed to trauma, who have ACEs, who have been in difficult situations like that, when they are challenged, that is a stressful situation for them. And it is that toxic stress that can be really difficult for them to deal with. So restorative approach, it avoids putting kids in a further stressful situation, and it aims to de-escalate the situation, ensuring that that young person's got the opportunity to stay in our class where they belong. It also provides support for victims, and I think that's another thing that's important to mention. Restorative practices, it can be used in a variety of different ways. So you might be having a restorative conversation with one other young person, or it might be that it ends up in a restorative meeting if there's been, say, incidences of bullying or something like that. So, or if there's been a misunderstanding in peer groups, getting young people together to have a restorative meeting. The voice of the victim is really important in that, because sometimes I think when things go wrong, the focus is so much on fixing what's happened and moving forward that we maybe forget the harm that's been caused. So part of the restorative process is thinking about, well, what are the consequences of what just happened? Who has been affected by this, and how can we address that? How can we, you know, make amends for what's happened? Because I think a lot of young people, when they do make a mistake and they realise that they've made that mistake, they want to fix it, but they don't necessarily know how to fix it or the best way to do it. So we can offer that support through a restorative conversation. And it really gives them the opportunity to reflect on their actions and fix it. You know, I think it's quite an adult thing as well. Anytime that you make a mistake, you feel bad that you've made the mistake and you want to fix it. And I know sometimes there's young people, you're thinking, well, they don't feel bad that they said that thing that got a laugh in my class, but I suppose we need to kind of unpick that further and think about, well, why did they feel the need to get a laugh? Why did they feel the need to get attention in that way? So restorative practices, it really lets us kind of build that relationship to get to the heart of what's going on behind our young person's behaviour, and then support them to deal with it in a positive way. A thing I always keep coming back to as well is, as a teacher, it gives me time to think about my reaction to the situation. I know that sometimes in a class I can get really het up when somebody's doing something for the millionth time and you've told them to stop doing it and they just seem to not be listening. It can be really frustrating, and it can be really it can really get your anger up. So having that time, putting them outside and just saying, right, what's happened, it gives you time to think about it. And it might be that when you were in class, you saw them throwing a rubber or whatever, but when you go outside, they tell you 5 other things that they've actually done that you hadn't noticed. So you do get the full picture. And just taking that wee moment to kind of take a deep breath and go, right, I'm going to go out here calm, and I'm going to let them hear their side of the story, and then we're going to work towards the means of making this better. I think that's really beneficial, not just for the young person, but also for us as well.
You all have heard me calmly dealing with S1 over the last year and a half out in the back social space, so this is a big reminder for me too. We know in grade high school that relationships are important in everything that we do, and that has become even more relevant in the last year and a half because of everything that we've dealt with. And we know that our staff form amazing relationships with our young people. We know that the most significant element in helping people to attain and achieve, and because it's Emma and I closing the attainment gap, is good classroom teachers. It's the teachers who see the young people day in, day out. And so we have to ensure that every young person feels like they have their champion, their member of staff, somebody who will see their point of view, take on board what they're saying, and help them. One of the ways that we can build those relationships, and there are lots of ways, and our staff do it all the time, is through restorative conversation and using restorative practices. So it's really, really, really important that we don't think it's just something we do. This can make a difference, and it really makes a difference to the young people in front of us. So we have to keep working on it. So as Emma said, in the Jamboard, the biggest point that kept coming back up there was listening. Young people, we want to speak to someone who's listening to us. And I guess this is probably the bit that's been the biggest reminder for me, is sometimes I don't take the time to listen to the young people. I've even caught myself saying, I don't want to hear your version of events. And that's not good. And so this is a good reminder for me, and really using active listening skills. We're going to show you an example of a restorative conversation. Things to remember when you're conducting a restorative conversation are things like these active listening skills, which I'm not going to read for you. Positive body language. Don't cross your arms. Be open. Try and be relaxed with a young person. As Emma said, that can be difficult in a classroom setting, and that's why we encourage you to take these conversations outside of the classroom. But it's really, really important. Sound like you're interested in what the young person has to say. They have to feel like they're telling their side of the story. And yes, we can then challenge that, but it's really, really important that they are heard.
Okay, so just bear with us while we get the wee video for you. Some of you might have seen this before. Some of you might have recognised the star of the video. If there's no sound playing, let me know. I have tried it about 4 times, so hopefully it does work. But if you can't hear anything, please let me know and I'll amend that quickly.
No sound for me. Still no sound, Emma.
Sorry guys, is that getting no sound?
No sound at all.
Right, 2 secs, I'll try this again. I'm also getting a sign saying bad network quality, so it might be that it's just a poor quality network from down here. But we will try again.
The tasks that you could do to gain your internet. Caitlin, the second time I've spoken to you about that. What's going on? Okay, Caitlin, could you go outside for me, please? I'll speak to you in a minute. Okay, Caitlin. Okay, so you've thrown a piece of paper in the class. You recognise that you've done that. Okay, who's been affected by what just happened? The class has been affected because you're out here, and I'm out here. Anyone else? Me, because obviously I'm upset that you've not listened to what I was saying in class. Anyone else? Yeah. Where should you be right now? Working, getting on with your task. Unfortunately, you've ended up out here. So we've established that you've thrown a piece of paper. You're out here, so you're not learning. I'm out here, so I'm away from the class, and the class are being affected because they're not learning either. How can we resolve this situation? How can we fix this? Okay, pay attention, not throw things when we go back into class. That seems like a good plan. Is there anything else you want to say? Thanks, Kate. I'm happy for you to come back into class, but I will be back on task, please. Okay?
See, it's that easy, piece of cake. So the little video there is really just to give you an idea about how a conversation might run. Obviously, this will be different in your classroom setting, but a restorative conversation should follow a specific process. And that is facts, consequences, and future. So the first thing that you would do is you're going to clearly identify what happened, who's been affected, and what pupils can do to make amends. So what we need to do is remind ourselves when we're summarising, we need to use a young person's own words. So when you've asked them what's happened, summarise what they have said in their own words. So what you're telling me is, this happened. So what you're saying is, this happened. That allows them to feel listened to. It also ensures that we don't make assertions. We don't say, oh, well, I saw this happening and I saw this going on. And when we're summarising it, it shows that we've been listening to them. So it's using those active listening skills, and it's really picking up on what the young person is saying. This comes with the added benefit of perhaps a child telling you a bit more than you knew. So as I mentioned earlier, not only did they throw a rubber, but they also had lobbed a highlighter 2 minutes earlier or whatever. They don't know all the things that you've seen. So if you go out there, what happened, they might assume that you know everything already. But I think that summarising, that using their own words is such an important part of it, because as mentioned earlier, a lot of young people get frustrated because they don't feel listened to. So that's the first step in de-escalating this situation. You're letting them have their say. You're letting them explain to you what happened. Sometimes if you go out there, absolutely, you might get a nothing, didn't do anything. If that's the case, feel free to go back into your classroom and leave them to cool down for a little bit longer. If it's the case when you go outside, you get a nothing, you can absolutely follow up with, well, just before you were sent outside, what happened? So you're giving them a bit more direct, you're directing a little bit more to the specific thing that you're talking about, but you're still asking that open question. If we're admitting that they've done something wrong, kids do feel a sense of shame, and if we're having this conversation, it's a difficult process for them. And we're there to support them. You're not there to make them feel worse. However much you might be frustrated that they've ruined your lesson, or that they've, done something for the millionth time that you've asked them not to. We're trying to teach them the positive behaviour. We're trying to model the behaviour that we want from them. So we've got to keep calm. We've got to stay nurturing, and we've got to make sure we're following this process. So the next part is the who's been affected. So this part, we're really looking at, well, as a result of this behaviour, what's been the impact of it? So we want the young person to identify, well, obviously, they're out here talking to you, so they're not in class learning. You're outside speaking to them, so you're not teaching the class. So if you're outside and the class doesn't have a teacher, that's a whole load of people being impacted. So we need to make sure that, sometimes you might need a little bit of guidance. Again, that prompting question about, well, who's been affected? Me. Okay, who else has been affected? And continuing that to help support them to work out who we need to kind of identify. When dealing with distressed behaviour and perhaps having a fifth restorative conversation this month with the same pupil, it's really important to remember that we don't perhaps always have the full story about a child, and that the path to overcoming trauma is not going to be smooth and steady. So don't be frustrated if you have a restorative conversation and it goes brilliantly one day, and then you have exactly the same conversation the next day and it absolutely explodes and goes completely wrong. that is not to do with you, it's not to do with restorative practices, it's to do with stuff that's going on in that young person's life that we maybe don't know about. But we really need to remember, we're the adult in the room, and all behaviour is evidence of need. So keep calm, keep your emotions in check. I'll say it again, you are the adult, and we're the one that we can adapt our behaviour easily. Young people can't adapt their behaviour as easily as that. So we can't model calm, respectful behaviour if we're losing it. So we need to keep it together, and we need to make sure that we follow. I mean, following this process is really helpful for kind of keeping you on track and not getting distracted. So that facts, what happened, consequences, who's been affected, and future. So the final step, planning for the future. This enables pupils to resolve that sense of shame that they feel, and it also shows them a positive way to deal with their mistakes, and it teaches them that they can do that, they can fix things. Now, that might be that as part of your restorative practices, you have got a particular behaviour policy in your department. That is absolutely fine. If what they've done requires a detention or a punishment exercise, that still happens. So, in the fact, consequences, future, it might be that a consequence is they need to do a detention, or they need to fill in a punishment exercise, or whatever is the system in place in your faculty. And that's absolutely fine. That's part of the process. What's fine, though, is sometimes the kids are much, much harsher on themselves than you are. So, if you're saying, well, how can we fix this? What can we do differently? Well, I should do like 4 detentions. And you're sitting there going, I don't want to spend lunch with you 5 times this week. So it's about helping them work out the kind of level of things as well. So if they've done something that is kind of relatively low level, it might just be we have this conversation and we go back in class and don't do it again. Or if this is the 5th time we've had this conversation, well, we're having this conversation a few times. So what else do we need to put to help you? And it might be that they're getting distracted by the person, but that's they might say, I just cannot focus on it next, so can I move seats? And that's really helpful for us, because it might be something that we don't know, it might be something that we aren't aware of, and that young person is, making a really positive step and saying, this is what I struggle with, can you help me out? So just to reiterate again, we've got our facts, which is what happened, and you summarise in their own words. We then move on to the consequences, who's been affected by this, and you summarise their own words, and then the future. What can we do to make things better, and what we're going to do differently next time? And again, you summarise that and repeat it back to the young person.
So a bit of a reminder here about use, and the really important one there is to use open questions. One of the common pitfalls when we're using restorative practices is asking closed questions, and the young person has nowhere to go with their answer. You're not letting them think about what has happened. So it's really, really important that we use those open questions. And you'll notice that all of the questions on the previous slide that Emma showed you began with what, how, and when. All of the things here are just prompts. So remember, try not to do too much talking. You want the young person to be doing the talking. And like Emma said, this is not easy. When we started using restorative practices, it was really frustrating. But the good thing is now that our young people in Braes High School are used to this process. So it's really supporting them to go through it. And it will be difficult when you do it at first. And they will go wrong. But keep persevering with those open questions and allowing the young person to talk and find their own solution to the problem. Remember, Emma said it just a minute ago, you can prompt the young person. If you're getting that nothing answer, which is the big frustration, give them a little bit more information. So just before we had to come outside the room, what were you doing? Give them a bit more to help them through that process. So here's a reminder of the restorative conversation. So facts, consequences, and future, and all of those what, who, and how questions that we really have to try and get into the habit of using with our young people. Emma's given me all the activities to do this afternoon. So what I'm hoping for just now is either pop a wee comment in the chat, but ideally, if anybody's got some experiences of restorative conversations that you have had, what's worked well in those conversations? Because we've got really experienced teachers in the meeting today who will have used this process tens, hundreds of times. So you will have things that really work for you. What kind of behaviours do you target with this kind of conversation? Because there will be certain behaviours that really lend themselves to this kind of conversation. So we'd like to hear a little bit about that. And if you've got any examples of where it really goes wrong, we'd like to hear them as well. So either pop your hand up and we'll bring people into the conversation, or you can pop a comment in the chat as well if you've got any examples to give us. Don't all rush at once. Miss Godfrey.
Hi, I was just going to say that I find the future part of the conversation probably the bit that hits home most with the kids. So when they sort of tell me what they're going to do when they go back into the classroom, then I find that a good way of, if the behaviour starts to crop up again, so how I was talking about, you have 4, 5, 6 conversations with the same pupil. Normally, if I've had that little future conversation with them, if they start engaging in that low level behaviour, I'll just go up to them individually and I'll say, look, we just had a conversation about this outside. And normally that gives them a second to go, oh yeah, actually, I did say I was going to do X, Y, Z when I came back in. And that sort of helps to refocus them sometimes, so you're not constantly having to have the same conversation over and over again. So I find that really, really useful.
So focusing on their solution.
Yeah,
that's a good way to move it forward. Yeah, absolutely. Good advice. Yeah. I'm being very formal because this is how your names come up. Mrs. Douglas.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Yep. So I would say in terms of a particular pupil that I've had a number of issues with, I'm basically a fresh start every single period. I'm aware of the kind of challenges that she faces and that it's in a whole school. But the thing is, I keep telling myself, just don't keep going and keep going, even if I'm not necessarily in the mindset and I don't necessarily have the right patience. Taking a breath and looking at the bigger picture here, and I just keep remembering that there have been occasions where she's sat down, she's got homework, and I give her praise and I say, well done, that's fantastic, you've done. And then today, unfortunately, this afternoon wasn't a great example of that, but and I'll often say that humour can be a way to buy in a lot of kids as well. To a degree, especially when they expect to be, for example, set out, and sometimes they expect to be shouted at, they're anticipating it, and then when you come out in a relaxed manner and then speak to them in a mutual, respectful way, it sometimes throws them off a wee bit because they're kind of like, oh, actually, what kind of conversation is this having? And it can be really refreshing for them, especially later on in the afternoon. So there's definitely just an element of just keep trying and see what works with a lot of kids, and you never know, as soon as you get that wow moment where yes, it's worked, hold on to that and know that it's still possible throughout the year. It's just going to have a lot of ups and downs.
Brilliant advice. It's that thing about being the adult in the room, isn't it? And I guess what we have to remember about young people who have experienced trauma is that they're also used to rejection, and quite often they're challenging you to reject them, to shout at them, to give them the response that they're expecting. So when you give this different response, it's telling them that you're keeping coming back, like you said. And quite often in conversations, I tell young people, I won't give up on you, because they need to hear it. We'll keep having this conversation and we'll keep doing this over and over again until it helps you. So I think that's really good advice to everybody. We've got some things in the chat there. Linda's put having pupils talk to one another and allow them to work out a way forward for both. That's obviously really important when we're working with young people through the pastoral and pupil support teams as well, when there have been fallouts and all that kind of thing. And quite often the fallouts happen on social media, so it's not a face-to-face fallout. So bringing the young people together to be able to express what's going on for them is really important. Gillian said, I think the thinking time is essential. they might look reluctant to say anything and might think you're just going to fill the silence. I hold off that a little bit longer, and usually they will react with an answer. It's brilliant practice. That is the hard bit as a teacher, because you're already thinking, I'm outside the classroom, I'm away from my class, but persevere with that thinking time. It is really, really important, and it's down to the young person to move the conversation forward.
Yeah, just to second that, I think that's a really, really important bit, because quite often that is the most difficult bit for the young person. And if you're going out there calm, and you like Julie said, you're concerned that, well, I'm here, the class is not getting taught, but you have to kind of have that calm demeanour, because if they think that you're wanting to rush through this, then that gives them an out. Whereas if you're just standing there calmly waiting for them to say something, that is difficult for them, and that is the moment where if the young person has been out to ruin your lesson, they're actually realising, well, it's not had the effect that I wanted it to have. I am not getting the reward that I wanted. I'm getting a different kind of thing, and that's where the behaviour changes. And there are quite, I think, Andrea, your point was really good about that perseverance, and it's so nice seeing everyone's kind of saying the same thing, that we're not going to give up on these young people. And I think them knowing that and them realising that these are the young people that you're going to build really strong relationships with, and in kind of the senior years in school, they're going to still be at school because you went to bat for them, because you were the person who was a champion for them and stood up and said, I'm not giving up on you. And they're the people who are still going to be in your classroom in sixth year. And they will be markedly better behaved, of course, because they've done the restorative practices. But I think it's just so important to kind of give them that space, give them that time, and show that you are the person who's going to be there.
Yeah, I guess it is with the junior pupils especially. Julie said, I feel restorative conversations work effectively as pupils feel listened to. The consequences questions in particular allow them to think about everything and others has been affected, and it works well with pupils who require a little bit more nurture. Absolutely, those young people that need that time with a member of staff and that champion, that person who is looking out for them and helping them find a way forward is absolutely what we're looking for here. So yeah, brilliant responses. Thanks everybody.
It wouldn't be a Emma Taylor, Julie Wilkinson special if we didn't return to equity as our focus. So obviously equity is a key focus in education, and to ensure that every pupil in our classroom can achieve their potential, whatever their background. You'll hear us saying that a lot, Braze. It's about access, of equity of opportunity, making sure that every young person feels that they have the same access to the opportunities at school. That doesn't mean, equity does not mean that we are treating all young people the same. You absolutely shouldn't be treating them the same. You should be treating them fairly based on their individual need. That's the equity focus we're talking about. And I think this picture sums it up really well. Yeah, I can give everyone a bike, but that doesn't help them if they are in a wheelchair, or they're really tall, or they're really small. If I give them the same size bike, you need to give them a specific thing for what they need. And it's the same with how you treat our young people. You need to tailor your behaviour to what that young person needs. So everything we do as teachers is to improve outcomes for our pupils, and part of that is understanding and supporting their individual needs, and restorative approaches lets us do that. So what we would ask for is that you keep this at the forefront of your classroom practice. Our awareness of pupil needs and our understanding and patience is really key to achieving that equity and removing the barriers to engagement in education. Our first step when we started the Onwards and Upwards programme was building strong positive relationships, because if we don't have that, nothing else will work. We need to make sure that the first thing we do is build that strong relationship with young people and their families, because that is how we get the buy-in, that's how we get the engagement. That conversation about their football game on a Monday morning that they had at the weekend is what ensures that gets the homework out of them the next week, or make sure that they get the tasks done in your class. So whatever the kind of barriers our young people may be facing, we're ensuring that all our pupils kind of achieve their potential. Being ACE aware is also really important, and having that time and patience to think is provided through restorative conversation when dealing with issues. So it really works to make our school a safe place where pupils feel free from that toxic stress, free from trauma, and our most vulnerable learners have that safe space, that place that is not going to give up on them, that when they're trying their hardest to get rejection from us, it's not going to happen. So we just really wanted to kind of like emphasise that as well, because it is restorative practices is absolutely your forefront of achieving equity in your classroom, but the most important bit is the strong positive relationship that it lets you build with our young people.
Okay, so just in conclusion, whether you feel like it or not, you are the stable, caring adults, and that's what we have to present to our young people. They need that from us throughout their school day. We want to create those equitable classrooms that Emma was just speaking about, and converse practices are key to creating those relationships. We need to meet the individual needs of every young person in our classroom. We need to get it right for every young person, and this is exactly how we can do it. Inspiring young people, you can be that champion for a young person. You could be the person that hasn't given up on them. As I'm talking about, it can take a long time and it can take a lot of conversations, but it can happen. Respect is obviously at the forefront of everything that we do in Brace High School, and it's about those positive relationships between pupils and staff and all of our colleagues in the school. So it's really, really important. Never give up. You will have really good restorative conversations with young people. You will have the most frustrating restorative conversations with young people, and you will feel like giving up sometimes, but please keep going with it. It's really important. As part of our recording, we don't want to take up lots of time, so we don't need lots of detail, but please do flag those restorative conversations on OTB to help us build that bigger picture about what's going on for our young people. That young person might not be being flagged up to the house team, but if we go and look at restorative conversations happening across the school, then we understand that there's something going on for them. Remember, this is not the be-all and end-all. It's a tool in your toolkit. So please continue to use your departmental and school sanctions, use our behaviour policy, work with our pastoral and pupil support teams. But this is something that hopefully stops things from escalating for a young person. And that's what we want for all of our young people, so that they are in the classroom where they belong, learning and achieving and attaining.
Okay, that is us pretty much done, but I've got to put this slide on because I want you all to tell Fiona Malcolm that I had the articles on it. If anyone has any questions, or if there's anything you would like to kind of discuss or ask about it, we're happy to hang about for a wee bit and just have a wee chat about